So now we're going to speak about how are blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies enabling social and economic impact and inclusion in Africa. And our panelist this afternoon is Mr. Ian Merrington. I'll let him do justice to himself by introducing himself as well as his panelists. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Didi. And great one, JP. Good chat and something very aspirational, I think, for all of us, and particularly from a regional perspective in the Western Cape. I'm Ian Merrington. I'm CEO of the Cape Innovation and Technology Initiative and the Bandwidth Bond. We focus on transformative digital inclusion and supporting the digital and innovation ecosystem. I'd like to introduce my panelists. First up is Matthew ARNETT. Matthew is co-founder and CEO of PO8 and Fort NFT Protocol. Welcome, Matthew. Welcome to Cape Town.
Thank you.
Cheers. Nice to have you. Grab a seat. Next up, we have TOMI AYORINDE. TOMI is founder and CEO of CrowdForce. TOMI, grab a seat. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
And I think that's it for this afternoon. Grab a seat, guys. Is there anyone else?
Someone else.
Oh, there is someone else. Sorry, yeah. MAMADOU, founder and CEO of Ubuntu Group, chairman of Africa 2.0.
Thank you.
MAMADOU, welcome. Africa 2.0 sounds interesting. So I think to set the scene, you know, technology has impacted all of us, and I think has impacted the world and impacted the global economy in different ways. You know, and I think some of it is not necessarily completely positive. I mean, I think we've seen the gig economy. We've seen quite a hard side to technology, which actually creates, you know, a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots. We've seen job displacement. We've seen people not being able to hold on full-time jobs anymore because of the way the gig economy rewards people. That's not for everyone. And I think we've also started to see some political and social impact of that. I think the other side of that scale is technology for good. And you know, one of the roles we play at the Cape Innovation Technology Initiative on a sub-Saharan Africa perspective is look for technology that can actually create financial inclusion, that can create transformation, that can make people's lives better. And I think that's been quite an interesting theme through today of the role that blockchain can play in that on the continent. And you know, please feel free to bring in outside examples of other developed economies. So just as a start, and bringing ourselves back to Africa, which industries in Africa do you believe stand to be most disrupted by blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies? And I'll put that to whoever would like to take the question first.
Okay.
No volunteers.
No, I mean, I would say, of course, it's more of a continuation of when you looked at mobile payments,
yes,
right? Where I could say Africa has led the world in innovating in that space. I think it's around the tokenization, basically, right? So it's hard to talk about a specific industry, but what is at the center is the payments that are related to whatever industry you can talk about, right? And at this point, what it really gives from you know, whatever cryptocurrency is what I would call equal opportunity, in the sense that with a digital currency, basically, if you didn't have a bank account, right, neither a debit or credit card, you could now go on the internet and make a payment. Second element that is critical is, you know, in many African countries, one of the challenges are currency fluctuations, right? So a lot of people are basically, I wouldn't say victims, but I would just say dependent on the good governance of their leaders and therefore the maintenance of a stable currency. And if it's not the case, they get penalized. Now, with Internet of Money and the way it's coming, individuals would now have the freedom to effectively choose the currency they want to work with or transact with, and also be on par at a global level, because certain of those currencies are globally accepted and they can have it in their hands either through the mobile phone or internet.
MAMADOU, so in essence, financial services is right for disruption, and we've already seen some great examples in Africa, and that's likely to continue. And I guess to some extent, some of that technology which was nascent in Africa could well leapfrog to developed economies as well. And
exactly, yes.
I think there's some great examples of that. Tommy, from your side, any other industries that you would see specifically being ripe for disruption due to blockchain or crypto?
So I will say fintech also, but two things come to mind. One is obvious, which is remittances. People being able to send money across different countries, even in African countries. You'd be surprised how many families, people work in Ghana, but their family is in Nigeria, and what it costs for them to send the money across.
Cross-border.
And aside that, how long it takes to actually get to the bank to actually go get the money, right? And the second thing, because it's something I'm working on right now, is digital identities, which is the base of every single thing. So for example, last year, the government of Nigeria wanted to give out microloans to micro traders across the country. The problem is you can't give loans to people that don't seem to exist, right? So what we had to help them do was to actually do the legwork of capturing those people's identities, their biometrics and stuff, right? And then providing that infrastructure for them to then say, we're going to give you this microloan, and then we're going to study your digital history over time. If you pay back, then you get more loans. So I think those two things are extremely powerful ways that blockchain is helping.
Thank you. Matthew, from your perspective?
Well, what I've seen actually happen with impact investment across the continent through NGOs. A lot of people, if you're familiar with the NGO market here, it's turned into a for-profit business. So we have a lot of people that have come to us looking for non-fungible token funds where they can track investments from their fund direct into the project here, whatever country it is in Africa, and then they're able to pay them based on proof of work through stable token, and then that stable token is then further traced down to each proof of work that they're doing off-chain, on-chain, and I think that has a very transformative means of not just ensuring that in people's investments and investments from funds go to these projects so that it can actually do the good it's supposed to do from an impact level, because a lot of that money gets lost in the intermediates and the people that are supposed to be responsible for it. But then it also it helps engage and build these platforms for educators and new levels of entrepreneurs and other people who would maybe then not just need that impact of that investment anymore, and they're creating their own small scales of economy. So I do think that transparency overall, impact investment is going to be a great place to see things change.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Matthew. Tommy, perhaps just back to you. You spoke about digital identity. How can self-sovereign identity enable financial and social inclusion to a greater extent in Africa? Do you believe it can, put it that way?
I believe identity can, right?
Yes.
Whether it being sovereign or any other one. I think sovereign, obviously, we need to move towards an identity that is more in control of the person who owns it. So what I was first trying to say is we need to solve the problem of identity first, yes. And then we need to move it towards each person owning it to an extent and choosing who verifies my identity. So I think it will be very transformative in terms of implementing it, right? It'll be interesting to see how we implement it, but more importantly is anything that solves the problem of identity helps us a lot.
MAMADOU, in terms of actual adoption and the ability to have digital identity taken up in Africa, what sort of conditions do you think should be present on the ground?
Okay. I think we shouldn't underestimate or ignore what has been done at this point, right? I think if you look at the mobile telecommunication industry, in most African countries now, and Nigeria is a bit behind, you can't, no, it's, I'm a Cameroonian, which are French-speaking Nigerians, or Nigerians are English-speaking Cameroonians. It's a long story. But technically, everyone who has a mobile phone, who has a mobile number in most African countries today, has been required to produce some form of ID, whether it's a passport or a national ID. So this has helped a lot to get to a certain level, at least at knowing who is who and who has what. Now, I think now that what really needs to happen is indeed for people to take ownership back of that entity, so the sovereign point. But that's where blockchain comes again into play, right? So what should be normally requested is for authorities to make this data, to put this data on the blockchain so that people can effectively use it and industries can also rely on that. And it's not, it's not proprietary to a mobile operator or a bank. And I think that's really what the next stage is. But on the identity per se, we've made significant progress over the past 5 years. And even in South Africa, you can't go now. And this was probably also initially planned for specific reasons, especially because those mobile operators were moving towards mobile banking and mobile money. So in order to do it, they needed KYC.
So the gateway there really is mobile, but
yes.
the key point is the individual taking back ownership.
Exactly, taking back ownership and leveraging on blockchain for the interoperability. That's really what's going to be critical.
I think overall what we have to look at as a industry is a few key words. One is unity. So there has to be unity across the board with other people who are able to accept these identities, but it has to be driven by, I think, a public-private kind of partnership. So you have this sandbox where there's the government, they're the banks, they're the phone company, there are all these people who are going to accept my digital identity. Because if they're just sort of companies out there that want to take this on, the government doesn't support it, the key entities that have to support it don't recognize it, then it's not going to get anywhere. So unless there's that play of unity, and then we won't move forward, because that sovereign identity gives individuals a real feeling of having a stake in the country. Then from a more psychological level, you would see how that plays out in their activities throughout the country. For example, in China, they're building in this credit score about behavior now, that they're looking at everything.
It's scary.
But it is scary, but at the same time, you have to understand, now how does that play into how somebody becomes a citizen, or a role that they play within society, whether it be good or bad, and then how does that drive the overall growth of a country? So we have to look at different models. Also India, what they've done, they've almost been able to convert.
Absolutely.
Overnight, it's been amazing with their biometric system, trying to move away from cash to cards and so on. So looking at all these models, trying to bring the best thing to Africa, I think is the right thing to do, but you have to have in the public and private buy-in. It has to be there.
That's great. So I think certainly from my point, one of the most obvious use cases for blockchain in Africa is really digital identity, and probably with the most transformative impact the most quickly. And I think the hurdle we really have to jump over is who owns the data and where it sits. And I think the real emancipation of that will be giving it back to the user. And I think that, that we touched quite a lot on trust this morning. And, I think it goes all the way back to trust. And, the only, I think living example I can think that where it's got scaled up quickly really has been India. And it's been driven from the top down in quite a, I suppose, dogmatic way, and sometimes perhaps that's what's required. I think moving on to financial inclusion, it'd be great just to discuss some real live African examples of projects that we feel have really made a difference on the continent. Has anyone got anything that, maybe just even in your own region that comes to mind of things that have really got traction from a financial inclusion perspective on the continent?
Yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and talk about what we're doing. Shameless plug is the fact that we're taking small retail outlets in different communities and we're converting them to mini agent banks, right? And you can then say we're laying on crypto services too. So they also become mini crypto agents in their community. And as basic as that is, it's one way we believe you can drive adoption of almost anything down to the grassroots, because the bulk of the underserved use these retail outlets. So if you're actually going to serve these people, you need to take that service very close to them. And you can actually get them to provide services to each other, right? And that's what we're working on from our side. We find that very interesting.
So there's a project that we've been kind of consulting on with non-fungible tokens, adding in the component of cryptocurrency, but also having vendors and people sort of in a gig economy or Uber sense, where you can find someone who's able to take your cryptocurrency but then convert it into cash for you. So they're either mobile or they're at a kind of brick and mortar place. But I think when we look at blockchain and we think maybe this is the panacea, it's the solution, you often neglect to put in some practical tentacles that really drive home the impact. And I think with solutions like that one, and that's also in concert with Binance Labs, is you're seeing all of these little places pop up now that can change your cryptocurrency into cash. Because at the end of the day, as a society, you still have to use cash. It's still cash-based a lot. So I think if we see those microsystems grow across the continent, and then we're able to just worry a little bit about the safety with having that cash or being one of those providers, if that's something that's able to bloom, I think we're going to really see impact.
That's great. I think then just on to the last question, I think we saw, I was very impressed by JP's presentation and what they've done in Malta. And I think perhaps just to create a little bit of context, I think there are only about 450,000 people in Malta, and it's a relatively homogenous kind of population, but it serves as a fantastic use case of what you can do if you've got the political will. So what do you think African governments can do to, and I'm very happy for you to discuss just from your particular region, but what can African governments do to really stimulate innovation in blockchain and crypto on the continent? MAMADOU, can we start with you?
Yes, look, I think there's a reality here, is that technology moves faster than regulation and laws, right? So those who see an opportunity at it, like Malta, will jump at it, right? Now, I think on the regulation point of view, I mean, I've experienced a bit with central banks in different parts of Africa. My sense is that it's going to take some time, a lot of time, right? So, but the beauty is that we live in an interconnected world where with Web 2.0 and Web 3.0, there's no borders, right? And I think, and it's a very unique opportunity for people to actually start, right? Make it happen. And what I've learned also is it's success stories that drive adoption and that awakens decision makers. And we really, really need to start building those African blockchain champions that rise at national, continental, and global level to raise awareness. Think of Bitcoin. No one heard of it until 2017. I mean, except a few people who really knew what it was. But it changed the whole narrative and the whole interest of decision makers, policy makers, governments, etc. So I think the proof is in the pudding. It's really important not to wait for anyone, just start. You know, like they said, build it and they will come. Now, there is a very important thing that I've also noticed about decision makers and governments is they need to see their interest, right? So what we've done, for instance, in the case of Ubuntu coin. So we're launching this Ubuntu Gold, which is a digital currency backed by gold, 100% backed, but backed by gold that you would source from Africa. And in this case, what happens is we're promoting responsible mining, empowering artisanal miners, and using a portion of the transaction fees of this gold-backed digital currency to basically build hospitals, support education, etc., in a way that it's self-sustaining and redistribution model. Now they started seeing an interest to them. And the same way, if you start telling them that, oh, by the way, you can use blockchain to fund energy and use smart metering, oh yes, they can now see the use and the interest because down the road, people will have electricity. Same for education. The question of certificates that you can now put on a blockchain that gives authenticity, etc. So it's really by showing them where is the interest and how it would help. Where I've had a bit of challenges is on governance and corruption, right? So it's of course something they don't want to hear, but but the reality is that the international community wants to hear it, right? At the end of the day, if you can say that blockchain will help better governance, reduce corruption, I mean, so it's the usual model when you want to influence. You influence from within and from outside, and sooner or later you get it. And also reminding them that We have led when it comes to technology.
Absolutely.
So those are the main points.
MAMADOU, great. So Tommy, to take on from that, really, I think MAMADOU's key points there are create the use case and make it work and win the popularity vote, and then let the regulation catch up. Don't wait for government. Your view, are there any things that government could do?
For me, I wouldn't push government to put in any regulations, either for or against. I would stick to them doing nothing. Let self-regulation do a lot more over time, and then learn from that before you put in any regulation. So I would say do nothing.
I mean, that's what they're doing. You may want them to do something for it to move faster.
But I think just to speak,
Which is okay. I would agree, right? It's best that they do nothing that start blocking us. But it's always better if they help make it happen, right?
Yeah, it is.
So the larger point there, though,
start.
the larger point there is a greater conversation. So there's no conversation really happening, I think, from the governmental level and from people who are actually on the ground, working every day on projects, working hard. And then even in the blockchain community in general, there's this whole like elitism, like, oh, you're not from here and you're not that person, so you can't do this, you can't speak there. And then when your government wants to look for a consultant, they don't consult locals who actually know what's going on. They're going to bring in these foreign consultants who, okay, fine, they figured out stuff from this sandbox and that sandbox, but do they have their pulse on the nation? Do they really know what's going on? Probably not. But it's okay to have them in as well, but you have to have a lot of the local men on the ground that are really doing the job. They have to have a seat at the table. Once they have the seat at the table, once governments start to listen, then I think you can have roadmaps, you can do things in tandem, and you can really see it grow through education and otherwise.
Yeah, fantastic. Have you guys any last comments that you'd like to make from an African perspective and opportunities for blockchain that haven't been exploited?
Look, for me, it's the first time in a very, very long time that Africa has a unique opportunity to catch up and to leapfrog in a brilliant way. And for a very simple reason, is that borders have gone. With crypto and ICOs, you multiply the pool of potential investors by 40 times. And because you now can tokenize everything has value. And we've been, as Africans for a very long time, dictated what has value or not, right? And that's why we chose national resources, because we are poor, but we're rich. So it's us now to leverage on this underlying technology to really share and contribute to this universal civilization that we're part of. And I think it's since internet that gave us access to information in a level playing field. Now we have this unique opportunity. What crypto did was the possibility to act on the information, right? By investing or not, or by designing something. Now we can produce, design in a whole decentralized way, right? And I'm thinking of that American general that said his biggest challenge fighting Al-Qaeda is that for the first time they had to deal with a whole group and cells that had no center of command. It's powerful, right? And putting power back in the hands of the people is something that hasn't happened for a very long time.
No,
so let's leverage.
Fantastic, very liberating.
Yeah. Exciting times.
Exciting times. Well, I think what I would say, just to sort of cap off here, is education. I think that there's so much potential here, but if we don't educate people, they're still not going to be able to grab this opportunity of freedom. They're not going to be able to see it. They're not going to be able to actualize it, and it's just going to pass them. And it's going to be that disparity once again, where the have-nots continue to have not, and the rich just gets richer. So I think that we have to all, I mean, even for ourselves up here, we are fortunate that we have this stage, but then we have to go out from here and we have to educate a lot of other people to say, look, here's what's up, this is what you can do, here are the tools that you have, please go out there and try, and then perhaps we'll see some real empowerment.
I mean, 100%. I guess we all flew. You flew from Bahamas, you flew from Nigeria, I flew from Cote d'Ivoire to get here so that first it can get recorded and people can hear and we can exchange. And I think you're right. You know, education is the key, but I guess you need to pick people's interest because with such a big flow of information, and our responsibility is where exactly does it hurt for everyone to start listening? And once we hit that nerve, then everybody will want to be educated. And success story is a good one. Maybe you guys.
Correct.
Guys, fantastic. Thank you for traveling all the way down to Cape Town and sharing some broad Africa insights. It's very, very valuable. We really appreciate your time, everyone. I think a big hand for the panel.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.